Hello everybody, I'm Marc Zenner, the CFO of Persefoni. I was also a seed investor and advisor to Persefoni. I'm very excited to spend a little time with you this afternoon talking about data quality, sustainability reporting, and our experiences talking to companies that are trying to improve their carbon footprint reporting. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about Persefoni because, yes, I'm the CFO of Persefoni, I'm a seed investor, but who is Persefoni? What does Persefoni do? Persefoni is a startup. We started about 3.5 years ago, and we have a software platform that is designed to help companies measure, report, and manage their carbon footprint. And when I'm talking about managing their carbon footprint, obviously I'm talking about decarbonizing or reducing their carbon footprint. At the end of the day, that would be the end objective. I think it's kind of useful to explain how Persefoni started, because that context will help you understand how we approach this topic. The start of the Persefoni was a large US corporation in 2017. The founders were working at this company. They had pretty senior roles there, and the board of directors was asking them to provide a carbon footprint of a very large, complex energy company. And they said, sure, we'll do that. And they turned around and looked for a software solution that would do exactly that, because obviously several of them were in the IT digital space, and they thought a software solution should be ready and easy to use. And they found that there were no such solutions, that a software solution for carbon reporting, at least at that time, didn't exist. And they also realized that stakeholders increasingly would demand consistent and accurate information. So they decided to form the company. The actual start, as I said, was 2020, but the idea was kind of developed in 2017. And they knew that companies that would report would be looking for something that's accurate, low cost, and easy to use. From the very beginning, Persefoni has focused on compliance to standards. It has focused on transparency, using the concept of the carbon ledger. Obviously, the name explains it itself, a ledger of all your carbon transactions. And of course, a focus on accuracy. So that's really Persefoni in a nutshell. And my discussion here will obviously be influenced, biased, affected by all the conversations we're having with customers or potential customers that are thinking about carbon reporting. I would first like to discuss a little bit the people who are asking for this kind of information. Who are the primary driver for that carbon accounting, that footprint reporting? I would say that, at least from the perspective of our customers, and in particular in the private capital markets, private equity firms, and so forth, limited partners, large investors are definitely at the forefront of pushing companies for accurate carbon reporting. It's definitely surprising to me, because when I started investing in the company, I thought that a lot of the demand would come from public investors. And to my surprise, private companies or private equity firms with portfolio companies that were private were from the very beginning very active in asking and looking for such solutions. So that was definitely something that I didn't expect. But it will be clear to you later that this drive here is not only going to affect public companies, but also private companies, and not just large companies, but also mid-sized and small companies. The second set I'm typically focused on are executives. Now, these are typically the folks who are working with us and who are looking for a solution to measure their carbon footprint. Very often, they've made a commitment to their board, to investors about decarbonization, about being net zero. And very often, they don't have a good sense about what their baseline is. Do we really know what our carbon footprint is today? And do we understand what the typical measures are? everybody knows what a good ROIC is, or a good EBITDA margin, or what their debt to EBITDA should be, and how much money they're making in dollar terms. But very few executives at this point have a good sense of carbon intensity, carbon numbers, what the peers or comparables look like, and what they should be aiming for. So that's definitely a very big part of the story, and there will be a lot of learning along the way. A third set is the policymakers. Policymakers obviously are looking for standardization. They know that a lot of companies are reporting carbon footprint data, but they would like this information to be more comparable across companies, across time. Make sure that when investors or customers or suppliers are looking at this, that they know and understand what they're looking at. And then finally, interestingly, in particular with small and mid-sized companies, often they're privately held, they're investors, which is typically the owner and CEO. They're not really looking for that reporting specifically, but they're getting letters from large companies in the US or in Europe or elsewhere that are saying, you're my supplier. And as part of you being supplier to me, very big company here somewhere in the US or somewhere in Europe, I'm going to need more reliable carbon information, because your carbon footprint or the carbon footprint of your products rolls into my supply chain carbon footprint in scope 3, and I want better information on that. First, to establish a baseline, and second, to be able to, over time, select suppliers that potentially have a lower carbon footprint or products with a lower carbon footprint. So we went about to develop what we call the ERP for carbon. I would say that in this field, a lot of software companies are focused on sustainability, and there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but their focus was more on ESG or traditional EHS focus, kind of the broad ESG spectrum, and then within the E of ESG, a carbon footprint. And the main buyer in that space was the sustainability officer. From the very beginning, we've been focused on a buyer that is more in the finance office, a CFO's office. Could be a controller of sustainability, could be the CFO, could be the chief accounting officer, somebody in that organization, often paired with the sustainability officer, with slightly different focus, slightly different emphasis, but all of them looking, of course, for more accurate, better, more reliable carbon footprint data. It's interesting that people often compare, of course, carbon accounting with financial accounting. We've had a lot of conversations where users or potential users are saying, look, I'm very confused. You have a real alphabet of all kinds of different acronyms. I just can't understand it. At the end of the day, from our many conversations, it's apparent that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, GHGP, is the global accounting standard that we see most of our customers using. We have a feature in our software to use other reporting standards. I don't remember if anybody ever asked for that or used it. But one element of comparison here between the financial accounting standards, and by the way, they've been around in one form or another, and again with different iterations, of course, for more than 100 years here on the US side, obviously not with US GAAP and FASB, but with other organizations before. So there's an evolution there as well. And we have to anticipate that there will be a continuous evolution on the carbon accounting side as well. But you have obviously regulators like the stock exchanges across the world, or the SEC in the US, or sometimes it's states or monetary authorities. So you have a set of regulators. You have a set of reporting frameworks like FASB or ISB on the financial accounting side, and then of course TCFD or ISSB or GRI on the carbon accounting side, and then you have the calculations. And we believe that the number of calculations and the types of data are a lot more complex, and there's a lot higher quantity of those on the carbon accounting side. And of course, there's a lot less people who are familiar with carbon accounting than financial accounting. And as a result of that, we definitely anticipate that a big part of what we'll see in the next 10 years will be learning, training, an evolution where academic institutions, companies, the big four and the others will spend a lot of time training people to understand carbon accounting and be able to help companies report. In terms of calculation methodology, I have a little table here. I'm only going to focus on one example here in Scope 3. But I often speak to CFOs, board members, CEOs who say, look, I get it, carbon accounting is going to be important, but you know what? It's really all estimates. Nobody really knows what the true numbers are. Do we really want to work with that? Do we really want to report that? And I would say to that yes, these are estimates. But if you're using financial accounting, there's a lot of data in there that is also based on estimates. And we've been working on this for more than 100 years, probably even longer than that. And it's still an evolving field. Every time there's new types of trends, new information, new instruments, and we need to adjust and adapt. The same thing will be true for carbon accounting. But as an example, in Scope 3, the greenhouse gas protocol allows companies to, for example, estimate the footprint of business travel in a number of different ways. It could be based on dollar spent. So if you spend $100,000 on travel, there's an average emission factor for that, and you can estimate what your carbon footprint would be from this $100,000. That is one way to do it. It's accepted by the greenhouse gas protocol. It may not be the most accurate way, but it's definitely a way to do it. And having some estimate is better than having no estimate. A second approach is distance-based. You flew 25,000 miles, 30,000 miles to the West Coast, to Europe, and so forth, and you can do a distance-based calculation that is based on the average emission of a particular mile flown. Or the third approach would be to actually know specifically the flights that you took, the airline that you used, the jets that you used, and the kind of seat you had. And so you can actually have your fuel estimate, the fuel that you consumed, and the emission factor for that consumption, and get your carbon emission on that base. The point I'm making here is that different companies may or may not have the same granularity on their business travel, but they will all endeavor to use the right approach, and they will all endeavor to start maybe with dollars and then go to miles and eventually go to fuel. And so there's definitely a movement there where we're going to get better and better. And I would say the pushback to say that, hey, these are really estimates is one that I don't find is fair in the context of this being a very new field that we're developing, and we're just trying to get better and better data for that. So the big point here is that data quality is key. Once you have the software set up, the calculations are very easy. You enter the data, you hit return, you have your carbon footprint. But the real pain point with most of our users is actually gathering all this data from maybe many different locations across the world, finding who's responsible, finding who's got it, who's got the utility-based data for your large office in India. So that's really the pain point, gathering this data and ingesting it in the system. Once you have it, of course, calculations are easy with a piece of software. The regulatory environment is evolving very rapidly. Nice little map here of the world with the number of yellow spots, as you can see, mostly developed countries. What we found is that the regulatory developments were, of course, and all of you are very familiar with that, I'm sure, were moving along very rapidly around the same time, starting maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and definitely accelerating right now. What we've also seen is that, of course, there are some jurisdictions that are a little bit more stringent and where things have happened very quickly. And there's some other jurisdictions where it takes more time, or the actual requirements that are being imposed are relatively lax or fluid or based on materiality. And so there's a little bit more, I would say, nuance in how firms do or do not have to report based on this regulation. The other comment I would make is that the jurisdictions are in some cases affecting firms obviously outside of their jurisdictions. As an example, SB 253 in California which is something that's in process. Again, we can't predict the future, but something we expect for some time in the fall, potentially would affect companies that are actually operating in California. So they don't need to be domiciled there, but if they operate there and have a certain size threshold, they will have that reporting requirement. Same thing with CSRD in the EU. The requirement is based on a certain types of operating size threshold in the EU, either based on your revenue or based on the employees that you're using. So these are requirements that affect firms that are outside of these jurisdictions. And as I mentioned before already, private firms that don't operate there, are often suppliers of firms that have to report. And so in the context of scope 3 and supply chain, or potentially also in the context of their bankers who are looking at their finance emissions, they will have to report as well. There's an estimate for the CSRD in the EU of 49,000 companies. That's the one I put there. I've seen estimates of 60,000, 70,000, even more companies that would be affected. So obviously, these are wide-reaching requirements for carbon reporting. Carbon disclosure regulation is valuable. Why is it valuable? And again, you could say, Mark, you're definitely biased here. And I would say, yes, I am, for sure. But we have to remember that most of the large firms in Europe, Asia, and definitely the US already report their carbon footprint. So it's not really a matter of it's something new. No, they do it already. They have a sustainability report. They do the work already. But the question is more, can we make this comparable? And can we make sure that this does not confuse investors? Because the way firms do it is so different that investors cannot really make informed decisions. Now, we have to remember that in financial accounting, when we look at an EBITDA number, or in particular an adjusted EBITDA number, they could be adjusted in different ways from different firms as well. So comparability is something that we're always looking for, consistency as well. And there will always be some residual work from the perspective of investors. There's a lot of pushback from firms that have to report or would think that they will have to report. I just want to highlight some of the main, I would say, topics that I'm hearing about when I talk to these firms. Obviously, they're saying it's expensive. Yes, it is more expensive than not reporting. But bear in mind, as I said in the previous page, they're already reporting most of them anyway. So it's really a different level of reporting, but they're doing it already. And some ways of reporting are obviously less expensive and not necessarily less accurate. They might talk about the liability this exposes them to, saying that if we report, we may be sued for something. I would say to that, yes, that's possible, but this may happen with your sustainability report already. It could give other firms competitive insights. That is correct as well, but that is also true with financial accounting, and it could give them insights about you, but them reporting will also help you understand where you stand and be able to look at comms and understand what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And of course, it's taking time, and they might say that it's not that material. Before I'm closing here, I wanted to make a couple points about what makes Persefoni so unique in this approach here. First, we're a software-driven company, so the consulting side is not really part of it, but we collaborate with a lot of consultants. We're focused on compliance, something I mentioned to you already, and we have a lot of carbon solution directors or carbon accounting experts that help companies on board, because as I mentioned before, carbon accounting is a new field, relatively new, and so a lot of companies don't necessarily have the in-house expertise to do this. Look, in conclusion, what gets measured gets managed. What gets measured well gets managed well. So I'm just hoping that little by little we can focus on the managing part, the decarbonization part, but we cannot do that effectively if we're not first measuring effectively. So that's really what we're hoping to achieve here. I want to thank all of you for your attention. I'm looking forward to interacting with you in the future. And again, have a great rest of the session and a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you.